The text came through at 6:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. They're filing the lawsuit tomorrow morning. My lawyer says you should get representation immediately. I'm sorry. That was Marcus, my fiancé. 3 years together, 6 months engaged, sitting in some downtown office signing documents that would officially paint me as a fraud, a negligent trainer, and a danger to public safety. He didn't even call. Didn't have the courage to tell me to my face that he'd turned state's evidence against me. I read the message 3 times, each word landing like a punch I'd somehow already learned to absorb. My apartment was dark except for the glow of my laptop, and the city lights filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I couldn't afford to keep once the legal fees started. I didn't cry. That would come later in the shower, where no one could see the small sounds my body made, when it realized the man I'd planned to spend my life with had handed them the ammunition they needed. Instead, I opened my case file. Thousands of pages of statements, training logs, video footage, and witness interviews that I'd been compiling for 3 months. Everything they said I'd done wrong. Everything that proved I hadn't. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a link from an unknown number. I opened it. The headline ran across my screen in bold, brutal letters. Bootcamp trainer faces negligence suit after Golden Boy competitor suffers irreversible injury. Victim's family demands accountability. They weren't just suing me. They were destroying my reputation before I had a chance to defend myself. That's when I knew something true and permanent. I was going to end them, not violently, not messily, but completely. The way a chess player thinks 17 moves ahead. The way water erodes stone, patient, inexorable, unstoppable. 3 years earlier, I was someone else entirely. I wasn't famous. I wasn't successful in any way that mattered to my family. What I was obsessed. With fitness, yes, but more than that, with the idea that I could build something from nothing. That I could take broken people and make them strong. My name is Alina Rodriguez. I'm 32 now, but then I was 29, with $8,000 in my savings account and a commercial lease on a 4,000 square foot space in the industrial district of Portland that had been a failed CrossFit gym. The owner was desperate to get out of the lease. I paid cash for 3 months up front, all the money I'd saved since leaving my job as a corporate fitness instructor, and opened my doors on a Monday in March. Elite Core Bootcamp was what I called it. The name was aspirational. Ridiculous, maybe, but there was something about the emptiness of that warehouse. The way the morning light came through the high windows, the sound of my voice echoing off the concrete, that made me believe it could become something real. The first month, I had 4 clients. A woman rebuilding after a divorce, a man trying to get healthy before his daughter's wedding, 2 teenagers whose parents had dragged them in because they were, quote, heading down the wrong path. I trained them every morning at 5 a.m. My own session came after, alone in the space, pushing myself until my hands shook with exhaustion. By month 4, I had 22 clients. By month 8, I was turning people away. I wasn't the loudest trainer. I didn't scream or shame anyone into compliance. Instead, I paid attention. Deep, specific attention. To the woman's knee pain and how it meant she needed different mechanics, not more weight. To the teenager's inability to focus and how it came from genuine confusion about what he was capable of, not laziness. To the divorced man's tendency to overcompensate and how to redirect that energy into real strength instead of desperate trying. I kept meticulous notes. Handwritten, date-marked. I knew my clients' lives, their fears, their goals. I celebrated every one of their victories like it was my own. My apartment was small, a studio in a converted warehouse 3 blocks from the gym. I spent almost no money on myself. Everything went back into the business. New equipment, better flooring. A small office where people could talk privately if they needed to. I ate the same thing every day, eggs, rice, vegetables, chicken. I didn't drink. I didn't date. I had one close friend, Diane, who I'd known since college, and we'd meet for coffee once every 2 weeks. "You're going to burn out," Diane told me during one of these meetings, watching me stare at my phone where I was answering a client's question about nutrition. "I'm not burning out," I said. "I'm building something." She smiled, sad and knowing. That's what burnout looks like in people like us. We call it passion. But she was wrong. It wasn't burnout. It was purpose. For the first time in my life, I was doing something that felt true, something that mattered, something that was mine. Then Marcus walked in on a Tuesday evening in October. He was there because his company, a venture capital firm called Apex Capital, had decided to do a team-building exercise. 30 employees. Expensive, high-powered people in their late 20s and 30s who'd made a lot of money on other people's ideas. "I want to test myself," he told me after that first session. He stayed late, asking questions about form, about progression, about what he'd need to do to get serious about training. Marcus was beautiful in that specific, unthreatening way that attractive men often are, not threatening because they've never had to fight for anything. Light brown hair, hazel eyes, clothes that cost more than my monthly rent. He had the casual confidence of someone who'd never experienced real failure. "You should come 3 times a week," I told him. "You've got good body awareness, but you need consistency. 3 months before you'll see real change." He came the next morning at 5 a.m., and the morning after, and the morning after that. Within 2 weeks, he was one of my strongest clients, not because he had exceptional genetics. He didn't, but because he brought a different kind of intensity. Everything was a competition. Every weight, every time, every rep was a challenge he needed to win. I found him fascinating to work with. You could give him a problem and watch his brain work through it, his body responding to what his mind had figured out. We started talking after sessions. Then we started getting coffee. Then, one night in January, after I'd run him through a particularly brutal conditioning circuit and he was sitting on the bench catching his breath, he looked at me and said, "I think I'm in love with you." I didn't respond right away. I was suspicious of my own feelings. I'd built my life to exclude exactly this kind of distraction. But looking at him, sweating, honest, vulnerable in a way he never allowed himself to be in his corporate life, I felt something crack open. "That's not a good idea," I said finally. "Probably not," he agreed. "Come here anyway." We started dadding quietly. I didn't want it to be a thing with my clients, and Marcus appreciated that I had boundaries he had to respect. He'd never been with someone who wouldn't accommodate him. It made him want me more. By spring, he'd moved in. By summer, he'd proposed. A simple platinum band that he slipped on my finger while we were sitting on my apartment's fire escape, looking out over the city lights. "I want to marry you," he said. "I want to build something with you." That should have been my first warning. That language. Build something with you. As if he was taking ownership of what I'd already built, as if his participation elevated it somehow. But I was in love. I was happy. I was stupid. I didn't see what was coming. The first crack appeared in late September, almost 2 years into our relationship. Marcus suggested we expand. "You're too small," he said. He was sitting at my kitchen table with his laptop open, showing me projections. "Look at this. If we opened 4 more locations, hired certified trainers, created an app-based program, we could franchise this. You could make real money, Alina, generational wealth." "I don't want a franchise," I said carefully. "I like what I've built here. It's specific to the people." "That's exactly the limiting factor," he said. He wasn't being mean. He was being logical, which somehow made it worse. "You're one person. You can only train so many people. There's a ceiling." "I don't want to break through the ceiling," I said. But he was already making calls. That's when he brought in the new trainer. His name was Cameron Price, and he was, according to Marcus, a genius who'd trained elite athletes in California, had some minor social media following, and was looking to expand his brand. "He'll take the evening classes," Marcus explained. "You keep your morning people. This way you grow without burning yourself out." Cameron was exactly what you'd expect, aggressively charming. Confident in his own infallibility, the kind of person who described himself as disruptive and meant it as a compliment. He was younger than me by 5 years, built like he'd never had a body fat percentage above 8, and entirely convinced that science and strength were the same thing, that harder, faster, heavier was always better. In my notebook from that time, I wrote, CP lacks nuance, good at looking the part, bad at seeing the person. But I didn't say this to Marcus. I didn't want to seem threatened or territorial. And besides, maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was being precious about something that didn't matter. That's what they wanted me to think. The first sign was when Bethany Chen came to me on a Tuesday morning. She'd been with me for almost 2 years. She was 53, an accountant, someone who'd come to me after her doctor said her blood pressure was dangerously high. Through consistent, carefully programmed training, she'd transformed. Not just her body, her entire life. She'd broken up with an emotionally abusive boyfriend. She'd asked for a promotion at work. She'd started dating again. I'm thinking about dropping the evening class with Cameron, she said. She looked uncomfortable. Why? I asked. He's very aggressive about the training. He keeps pushing me to do things I don't feel ready for. When I say no, he makes this comment about how people who are serious commit all the way. Last week, he grabbed my form during a deadlift and adjusted my position so aggressively I got a bruise on my ribs. I felt my jaw tighten. Did you tell him it hurt? He said that pain is part of the process, that I needed to learn to distinguish between good pain and protective pain. She paused. I don't think he was being deliberately mean, Alina, but I think he doesn't see me as a person. He sees me as a project, something to fix. I documented it. The date, Bethany's exact words. I asked if she wanted to file a formal complaint. She said no. She just wanted to avoid his classes, and she did feel stronger, so maybe he was right and she was just being fragile. But I kept the note. 3 other people came to me with similar stories over the next month. A younger woman who felt humiliated when Cameron corrected her form in front of the whole class. A man who was pressured to lift more than his body was ready for and felt pain in his knee for days afterward. Each one of them minimized it. Each one of them questioned their own reaction. This is what manipulation looks like when it's done well. It's not obvious. It's not dramatic. It's the slow, patient erosion of someone's faith in their own experience. When I brought it up to Marcus, he defended Cameron immediately. He's a professional, Marcus said. We were in bed, and I remember he didn't even turn to look at me when he said it. He's probably just more direct than you're used to. You're gentle. Not everyone needs gentle. Some people need to be pushed. These aren't people who need pushing, I said. They're people who are afraid. There's a difference. Maybe. Or maybe you're being territorial because he's better at the business side of this than you are. That landed differently than I think he intended. I felt it. The implication that I was just being an emotional woman protecting her territory because a man had come in and shown me how things could really be done. I stopped arguing. I moved closer to him. I put my hand on his chest and felt his heart beating, steady and unconcerned. This is what I told myself. He doesn't understand. He's trying to help. This is his version of love, wanting me to be bigger, better, richer. I was already making excuses for him. By November, Cameron had become a partner. I found out from Marcus, casually, the way you'd mention you'd picked up groceries. I'm giving him 20% ownership, Marcus said. In exchange, he's going to take on most of the operational load. You can focus purely on training. You can't give away 20% of my business, I said. It's our business. We're getting married. I built this before I met you. It's not yours to give. He looked at me, really looked at me, and there was something cold in his expression that I didn't recognize. That's not how this works. When you love someone, you share, you build together, you don't keep score. It's a specific kind of manipulation, when someone takes the language of love and weaponizes it. When they make you question whether your need for autonomy is actually just greed or fear. I signed the paperwork. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I could fix it later. By December, I couldn't have fixed it if I wanted to. The setup was perfect. So perfect, I have to admit, now that I understand the whole picture, that it was probably designed this way from the beginning. The competition was Cameron's idea. Elite Core Winter Championship, he called it. An internal competition where trainers would pick their best clients, put them through a grueling competition, and crown winners. cash prizes, local media coverage, perfect for marketing the franchise expansion. It was scheduled for December 15th, 3 weeks after the partnership announcement. Cameron picked his team first. 4 people, including the strongest man in the gym, a guy named Derek who'd been with Cameron for 6 months and trained exclusively with him. Derek was massive, probably 220 pounds of muscle, competitive bodybuilder type, and smart about his training. I had to respect him, even though I didn't particularly like him. He wore his strength like an entitlement. I was supposed to pick my team. Cameron was generous about it. "Pick whoever you want," he said, with this smile that suggested he didn't think it mattered. I chose carefully, not the biggest, not the strongest in any obvious way, but the people who'd been with me the longest, who understood my training philosophy, who worked smart instead of hard. One of them was Maya Ortega. Maya had been coming to Elite Core since it opened. She was 38, a lawyer, divorced, and when she first came to me, she could barely do 10 push-ups. She'd spent 15 years in a marriage where her body had been criticized constantly, not muscular enough, not curvy enough, not the right shape for anything. She came to me broken. I spent months just rebuilding her confidence. We started with bodyweight movements, then progressive loading. I paid attention to her posture, the way she moved, the way she'd flinch slightly when someone looked at her during a workout. Slowly, methodically, I helped her reclaim her body. 2 years later, Maya could deadlift 245 pounds. She could do 50 push-ups. More importantly, she stood differently. She moved with authority. She looked in the mirror without that slight wince. "I'm going to put you on my competition team," I told her. "Elena, no," she said immediately. "I can't compete, not against those people." "Not against them," I corrected. "With them, to test yourself, to see what you're capable of." She was terrified, but she trained with me every day, sometimes twice a day, building her confidence alongside her strength. By the middle of December, she was ready. The competition had 3 events: a max weight deadlift, a 20-minute couplet of kettlebell swings and box jumps for reps, and a final mystery event that would be revealed the morning of the competition. Derek was favored to win. Cameron had built him specifically for this. The narrative that was already circulating in the gym, I heard it whispered, was that my people were going to get demolished. That Cameron's coaching was superior. That this would prove once and for all that I was a good trainer for regular people, but the real athletes needed real coaching. The first event was fine. Derek maxed out at 455 pounds. My strongest lifter, a guy named Tony, hit 405. Not bad, not winning, but we weren't done. The second event is where things got interesting. When the couplet started, 20 minutes of as many reps as possible of kettlebell swings and box jumps, Derek came out aggressive. 2-handed kettlebell swings, explosive, powerful, trying to establish dominance early. He was brilliant for the first 8 minutes. Then his form started to break. His shoulders got tighter. His swing got shallower. The power that had been explosive became just effort. Maya came out differently. 1-handed kettlebell swings. Smooth, economical, breathing methodically. She moved like she had all the time in the world, which meant she actually had all the time in the world because she wasn't wasting energy on ego. By minute 12, Derek was struggling. His grip was failing. His shoulders were screaming. He kept going, but the spark was gone. Maya stayed smooth, steady, present. She finished with 347 reps. Derek finished with 298. I watched Cameron's face as the scores were announced. Something flickered there, surprise maybe, or calculation. "Mystery event tomorrow morning," he announced. "Doors open at 8 a.m. sharp." That night, I got a text from Marcus. He was staying at his apartment downtown. He'd been spending more nights there lately, because of work, the text said. "Cameron wants to talk about the competition tomorrow before it starts. He thinks your team might be intimidated, and he wants to be respectful. Come by the office at 7 a.m. Something in my body knew. Some ancient warning system that predators trigger in prey. But I ignored it. I told myself I was being paranoid. The next morning, I got to the gym at 7:15 a.m. Cameron was already there, and so was Marcus, and so was a person with a camera and a tripod. "What's this?" I asked. "Just documenting the event," Cameron said, "for content." But that's not what was happening. The mystery event was announced, a head-to-head combat simulation, hand-to-hand with protective gear, testing strength, speed, and functional athleticism. The bracket had been predetermined. Derek was matched against Tony in the first round. And then, in the second pairing, it said, Cameron Price versus Alina Rodriguez. "What is this?" I asked. "You're a trainer," Cameron said. "But are you actually strong, actually capable? I think it would be good for people to see." Marcus was looking at his phone. Not at me, not at Cameron, at his phone. "I'm not fighting you," I said. "Why not?" Cameron's smile was perfect, reasonable. "Afraid you'll lose in front of all your clients." This is the thing about manipulation. If it's done well, it makes you complicit. It makes you the unreasonable one for pointing out what's happening. "I'm a trainer, not a fighter," I said. "This isn't what elite core is about." "Exactly," Cameron said. "It's about limiting beliefs. You teach people that they're weaker than they are. This would be a chance to show them you believe in yourself enough to test yourself." The gym was starting to fill up. People were setting up chairs. My clients were arriving, excited, ready to watch their trainers compete. Bethany was there. Maya was there. The whole community I'd built was gathering to watch this setup unfold. I had a choice: walk away and look like I was afraid, or play the game and lose. But here's what I didn't know yet. I wasn't going to lose. The combat simulation was supposed to be a scoring system based on technique, speed, and control, officiated by a retired fighter Cameron knew. I put on the protective gear, mouthguard, helmet, gloves. Cameron did the same. "Just a little test," he said before we started. "Nothing serious." And then the whistle blew. What happened in the next 4 minutes is the most important moment of this story, so I'm going to describe it exactly as I experienced it. Cameron came at me with confidence. He threw a combination, a jab, a cross, an attempt at a hook. That would have been impressive if he was the only person in the room training his whole life. But I wasn't impressed. I was precise. I slipped the jab. I felt the cross coming and moved 6 inches back, letting it whistle past my ear. The hook I caught with my left hand used his own momentum against him and took him down. He hit the mat. The room went silent. I didn't celebrate. I didn't trash talk. I helped him up. And when the official asked if I wanted to continue, I said, "No, I'm done." Cameron got up and his face had changed. The confidence was still there. It takes a lot to crack that kind of ego, but underneath it was something else, something real. Recognition, maybe, or fear, or both. The whistles sounded. The rules said if I wanted to continue, we should. I didn't. I removed my gloves and walked off the mat. But I heard him whisper to Marcus, "She fought before." That's when I knew. That's when I understood the shape of it. After the competition ended, after my team won the overall title and the cash prize and the local news coverage, Cameron pulled Marcus aside. I watched them from across the gym. Cameron was talking urgently. Marcus was shaking his head. Then Cameron showed him something on his phone, a video, I think, and Marcus's expression changed. Later that night, Marcus came home and he was different, colder, distant. "I need to ask you something," he said, "and I need you to be honest." "Okay," I said. "Have you ever fought competitively? Like mixed martial arts, boxing, anything?" "No," I said, and it was true. "I've trained in self-defense. I've taken some martial arts classes, but I've never competed." He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw him deciding whether to believe me. "Cameron thinks you lied about your training background when you came to elite core," Marcus said finally. "He thinks you misrepresented yourself to us. He's worried you've been hiding credentials, maybe hiding income, maybe creating liability issues if you've been training people in combat techniques without disclosure." "That's insane," I said. "Is it?" And there it was, the seed planted. The doubt introduced. Even though I was telling the truth, even though I hadn't done anything wrong, the implication hung there between us. Maybe I had. Marcus, I haven't lied to you about anything. You've been secretive, he said. You don't tell me about your past. You don't tell me about your training. You go to that office you have at the gym and shut the door. Because I'm a private person, I said. Because I have clients who need confidentiality. Because I had a life before you. That's what I'm saying. You did, and you won't talk about it. This is the thing about being gaslit by someone you love. They don't have to prove anything. They just have to introduce doubt. And then your own silence becomes evidence against you. The papers arrived 3 days before Christmas. Cameron and Marcus had filed suit against me for fraudulent misrepresentation and negligent training. They'd contacted an athlete, not even one of my clients, but someone from a gym in California where I'd briefly trained, and had him claim that I'd given him an exercise that caused a shoulder injury. The statute of limitations had apparently passed on suing him directly, but they had a theory that I'd knowingly dangerous techniques and misrepresented my certifications. It was manufactured, the whole thing, but it looked real enough, especially to someone who already wanted to believe I'd been hiding something. Marcus moved out that day. I didn't cry. I sat at my kitchen table with the legal papers in front of me, and I made a decision that changed everything. I was going to end them. Not by fighting, not by being loud or angry or even by lawyering up immediately, but systematically, methodically. The way you dismantle a building you've decided to demolish, from the inside out, starting with the load-bearing walls no one thinks to question. The first thing I did was stop being emotional. I'd spent the first few weeks after Marcus told me about the lawsuit fluctuating between rage and despair. I'd written texts I didn't send. I'd called Diane 3 times and cried until my throat hurt. I'd sat in my apartment at 3 in the morning wondering how I was going to afford a lawyer, how my reputation was going to survive, whether I should just shut down the gym and disappear. That person was a liability. That person could be manipulated. That person believed in fairness and the system and the idea that truth eventually prevails. I needed to become someone else. So I did. I cut my hair very short. I stopped wearing makeup. I started wearing all black all the time. Not as a statement. I wasn't trying to look like a revenge villain or some gothic character. Just practical. I didn't have mental resources to waste on appearance. I stopped sleeping much. I started sleeping 4 hours a night, using the other hours to work, to think, to plan. I stopped being nice to people I didn't trust. I became polite, professional, and utterly unreachable. Clients who'd previously gotten personal attention from me got standard programming. I didn't ask about their lives. I didn't celebrate their victories. I was their trainer. That was all. But I kept obsessive notes. Everything. Every client conversation, every class, every piece of feedback. I started a secure cloud backup system. I began recording all my sessions, with informed consent forms posted everywhere. I documented Cameron's training methods in detail, noting instances where he pushed clients beyond their capability, noting the feedback I was getting. And I started investigating. I hired a private investigator, a woman named Sarah Chen who specialized in white-collar crime. I paid her from an account that Marcus didn't know about, money I'd been saving for years, tiny amounts that I'd tucked away because some part of me had always known that independence was essential. I need everything, I told Sarah, sitting in her small office in a building downtown. Background checks on Cameron Price and Marcus Yates, financial records if possible, business history. Prior lawsuits, prior complaints, everything. That's going to cost, Sarah said. How much? $8,000 to start, more if we go deep. I wrote her a check. My hands didn't shake. What Sarah found was interesting. Cameron Price had sued his previous 2 employers for discrimination. Both cases had settled. One had involved a female employee who he claimed had been incompetent. She was now running a successful consulting business. Another involved a male client who claimed Cameron had knowingly recommended an inappropriate exercise that caused an injury. That case had settled for $25,000 with an NDA, but Sarah had connections. She'd learned about it. Marcus's financial record was messier than I expected. Apex Capital was a legitimate VC firm, but Marcus's personal finances were concerning. He'd been liquidating assets. Expensive habits I hadn't known about, gambling mostly. Cryptocurrency investments that had gone south. An affair with a junior attorney at his firm that had been quietly ended 6 months before we met. More importantly, he'd been in talks with Cameron Price for months before Cameron ever came to the gym. There were emails. Sarah's contact had pulled them from a hacktivist database. Emails where Marcus and Cameron discussed the Alina situation and how to extract value from the business. They'd known. From the beginning, they'd known. By late January, I'd gathered enough to understand the outline of what they'd done. Cameron wanted access to my client list and my training methodologies to franchise and sell. Marcus wanted cash. He was drowning in debt, and he'd seen an easy solution. Get the gym, get the methods, push me out, either settle with me cheaply or bury me in litigation until I agreed to sign away my rights. I was collateral damage, in a man's need, to cover his own failures. But now, I was the one doing the planning. I hired a lawyer, a woman named Patricia Holmes who specialized in business litigation and had a reputation for being ruthless. I met her on a Tuesday at her office downtown. They have a weak case, she said after reviewing everything. Absolutely weak. The plaintiff they've identified, Danny Hartford, his shoulder injury predates his training with you by 3 years. His medical records clearly show degenerative joint disease from a previous rugby injury. Filing suit against you for that is professionally irresponsible at best, fraud at worst. Why would they do it? I asked. Because they're hoping you'll settle just to make it go away. And because, she paused, looking at my file again, they need to discredit you. Once you're discredited, they can make claims about the business. The methodology, the whole thing. They're not trying to win a trial. They're trying to drag you through one. I won't settle, I said. Patricia smiled. Good, because I have a theory. I think Marcus Yates and Cameron Price committed fraud when they took equity in your business. I think they misrepresented the value they were adding. I think they're liable for the damage they've caused to your reputation and your income. Can you prove that? I asked. With your help, probably. Do you have records of all communications with them, agreements, documentation of the business structure? Everything, I said. I keep everything. That's when Patricia's expression changed. Then we're not just defending, we're attacking. I stopped wearing my engagement ring the next day. I didn't take it off dramatically. I simply stopped putting it on. It sat on my nightstand, and I stopped seeing it as a symbol of love or betrayal. It was evidence. It was a way to establish timeline and ownership. Over the next 4 weeks, I did what Patricia told me to do. I organized every single email, message, and document related to the business. I created a timeline. I noted every time Marcus had made a decision about Elite Core and when he'd made it. I documented every instance where he'd assured me the business was mine and contrasted it with his actions, which were designed to wrest control. I contacted Bethany Chen and asked her to file a formal complaint with the State Athletic Commission about Cameron's training methods. She was hesitant. Will it get back to him? She asked. He'll know, I said. I'm not going to lie to you, but I'll protect your identity as much as possible. And more importantly, you won't be alone. I'm going to encourage everyone who's had a negative experience to file. By the end of January, 5 complaints had been filed. Not huge, but enough. Enough to establish a pattern. I also did something that felt deliberately cold and necessary. I contacted Marcus directly, not to plead with him or to argue, but to meet. We arranged to have coffee at a cafe halfway between my apartment and his. He looked tired. That was the first thing I noticed. Not because I cared, I'd made myself stop caring, but because it was useful information. He was stressed. I've been thinking about what you said, I told him. I was calm, cool, the person I'd trained myself to become. About me being secretive about my past, you're right, that wasn't fair. He looked at me, surprised. I had some training before I started Elite Core, I continued. Nothing commercial, nothing relevant, but I should have told you, and I'm sorry I didn't. Elena, he started. I don't want to fight, I said. I don't want to go through litigation. It's expensive, it's painful, and I think we both know that neither of us really did anything wrong here. We just fell apart. He relaxed. I watched him actually relax, the tension draining from his shoulders. He'd been frightened. Frightened that I was going to be difficult. Frightened that there was going to be real conflict. I'm really relieved to hear you say that, he said. I want to settle, I said. But not for nothing. I'll sign over a portion of the business to you and Cameron. I'll grant him access to my training materials in exchange for a reasonable settlement and a non-disparagement clause. How reasonable? Marcus asked, the businessman returning. I named a figure, $200,000. Not small, not enormous. Not something he couldn't pay if he'd really wanted to keep the business. I'll discuss it with Cameron, Marcus said. There's one thing, I added, and this was the hook, the real reason I'd asked for this meeting. I need everything in writing, everything documented, no verbal agreements, full transparency, and I need you to dissolve the partnership with Cameron. Why? He asked. Because, I said, he's the problem, not you. He's the one who suggested the competition, who tried to discredit me, who's pushing this lawsuit. You're scared about money. That I understand. But Cameron has something darker. He needs to win so badly he'll burn anyone in his path. This wasn't entirely true, and we both knew it. But it was true enough. It was the kind of statement that had just enough validity that Marcus's conscience, which he did have, however dormant, would recognize it. He looked conflicted. Think about it, I said. I stood up. Let me know. 3 days later, I got a message. Not from Marcus, from Cameron. I know what you're doing. It won't work. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. He just confirmed that he understood the dynamic. That meant he was frightened. And frightened people make mistakes. A week later, Patricia got an email from Marcus's lawyer. He wanted to settle. He wanted the partnership dissolved, but Cameron refused. He's saying you're the one committing fraud, Patricia told me. He's saying you're the one who lied about your background to insinuate yourself into the business. He's doubling down on the lawsuit. Good, I said. Why good? Patricia asked, surprised. Because now we get to trial, I said. And I meant it. A trial wasn't something to fear. It was an opportunity. It was a stage. And I'd been preparing for my performance on that stage for 3 months. The night before the trial started, I couldn't sleep, which was unusual for me. I'd trained myself to sleep on demand. But that night, I lay awake and thought about something Marcus had said to me once. You're the most controlled person I've ever met, he'd said. It had been a compliment then. Like, you never lose your temper, you never yell, you're always thinking 3 steps ahead. He'd meant it as a positive. He'd loved that about me at first, that I wasn't emotional, that I was strategic. It was only when that strategism was turned toward independence rather than toward making his life easier that he decided it was a character flaw. I thought about Cameron, who'd tried to humiliate me in front of my clients, who'd worked with Marcus to systematically destroy my reputation, who'd believed, absolutely and without doubt, that I would crumble. I thought about the girl I'd been 3 months ago, crying in her apartment, devastated by betrayal. And I thought about the woman I was now, who'd rebuilt herself into something harder and sharper, and more dangerous than either of them had anticipated. The trial started on a Tuesday in late February. The courtroom was modern, bright, designed to feel neutral and fair. But nothing about a courtroom is neutral. Everything is performance. The way the jury is dressed, the way the lawyers position themselves, the way the witness sits and speaks. I wore black, no jewelry. My hair was very short, very severe. Patricia had suggested it. You need to look like you're telling the truth, she'd said. Not like you're performing truth, just like you know truth because you've examined it so carefully. Cameron's lawyer went first. His name was Derek Hoffman, a well-known litigation attorney who'd built a reputation handling high-profile cases. He was smooth, polished. He told a story about a trainer who deliberately misrepresented her credentials to gain access to vulnerable clients who'd trained them improperly, and who was now being sued by one of those clients. It was a good narrative, compelling, evil masquerading as expertise. He had Danny Hartford testify, the athlete with the pre-existing shoulder injury, and Danny had clearly been coached. He described, in detail, how I'd recommended an exercise that had injured his shoulder, how I'd ignored his pain, how I'd been dismissive when he'd reported the injury. It was all lies, but they were plausible lies. Then it was Patricia's turn, and instead of defending, she attacked. She called a physician, one of the best orthopedic surgeons in the state, who reviewed Danny Hartford's medical records and testified that his injury was pre-existing, that it predated his training with me by several years, and that the exercise he described would have been, if anything, beneficial for someone with his particular joint condition. She called 5 of my clients, including Bethany, to testify about the quality of my training, the care I took with their bodies, the way I encouraged them to listen to their own pain signals rather than override them. Then she called Cameron Price himself. This is when things became complicated. Patricia had him detail every interaction he'd had with Marcus before he came to the gym. She asked him about the emails where they discussed extracting value. She asked him about prior lawsuits. She asked him about Danny Hartford, and had he actually trained Danny, or had Danny been recommended by someone else? Cameron's lawyer objected multiple times. The judge overruled him. Under cross-examination, Cameron made a mistake. When Patricia asked him why he'd chosen Danny Hartford specifically as the plaintiff, he said, "Danny reached out to us. He was interested in suing Alina." Except Patricia had already established that Danny had never trained under me, that he'd been referred to his claim of injury by Cameron himself. Cameron realized his mistake immediately. His face went white. And then, because he was a man with too much ego and not enough control, he tried to recover. "I mean, we discussed it together," Cameron said. "Danny mentioned he'd been injured and I brought it to Marcus's attention." "So you contacted him first," Patricia said. "It wasn't a question." Cameron's lawyer stood up. "Objection. Sustained. Rephrase." "Did you contact Danny Hartford and ask him to participate in this lawsuit?" Patricia asked. "No," Cameron said, but his voice wasn't confident anymore. Patricia walked to the evidence table and picked up 2 pages. "Let me show you your texts with Danny Hartford from December 3rd through December 19th. You offered him payment, didn't you? You offered him $5,000 to claim injury from Alina's training." The room erupted. The judge called for order. Cameron's lawyer demanded a mistrial. The judge denied it. And that's when Patricia brought out the final piece, the piece I'd been waiting for. "I'd like to introduce evidence that Cameron Price and Marcus Yates engaged in systematic fraud to gain control of elite core bootcamp, that they deliberately misrepresented the value of their partnership, that they violated the terms of the ownership agreement by failing to disclose existing conflicts of interest, and that they manufactured a false lawsuit as part of their scheme." The documentation Patricia presented was meticulous. Email chains, text messages, financial records showing that Cameron had been receiving payments from Marcus, payments that he'd referred to in one message as Alina contingency funds. It was devastating. Marcus's lawyer immediately began settlement negotiations. By the end of the trial's 3rd day, Marcus had agreed to pay me $300,000, dissolve his partnership with Cameron, and sign a document admitting he'd acted in bad faith and misrepresented his role in the business. But Cameron refused to settle. His lawyer advised him to accept the deal. Cameron refused. "I'll be found not guilty," he said. He actually said this out loud in front of the judge. "The case is weak, you're bluffing." He was so certain, so absolutely convinced that his confidence could override the evidence. That sheer force of will could change facts. On the 4th day of trial, Cameron's lawyer called Cameron to testify. This was a mistake, but it was one Cameron had insisted on. He wanted to defend himself. He wanted to explain himself to the jury. He wanted to prove that he was the victim here, the victim of a woman who was trying to destroy him because he'd been better at business than she was. Patricia let him talk for an hour. She let him establish his version of events. She let him present himself to the jury, confident, articulate, attractive, successful. She let him build a convincing narrative. Then she started with the documents. Mr. Price, you mentioned that Danny Hartford reached out to you about his injury, correct? Yes, Cameron said. Patricia pulled up the text message. This text from December 3rd says, Danny, this is Cameron. I believe you have a previous shoulder injury that Alina Rodriguez aggravated. I'm interested in discussing how we might help each other on this. Can you explain what help each other means? Cameron's jaw tightened. I meant, it means you were offering him compensation, Patricia said. Because in the next text you write, I can offer you $5,000 up front and another $5,000 when the case settles. Correct. That was a misunderstanding, Cameron said. How is, I can offer you $5,000 up front a misunderstanding? He didn't have an answer. Patricia continued. She walked through the entire construction of his story, the meeting with Marcus where they'd discussed the Alina situation, the plan to take equity in her company, the decision to frame her as dishonest in order to discredit her, every single lie methodically documented. And then Patricia asked the final question. Mr. Price, in all of your communications with Marcus Yates, all of your planning to take over Alina Rodriguez's business, did you ever actually discover evidence that she'd misrepresented her background? No, Cameron said, and it was the first honest answer he'd given. So you manufactured the lawsuit knowing that Alina Rodriguez was telling the truth and had done nothing wrong. Objection, Cameron's lawyer said. I'll rephrase, Patricia said. Your lawsuit against Ms. Rodriguez was based on false allegations, wasn't it? Not false, Cameron said. Speculative. Speculative, Patricia repeated. She turned to the jury. That's one word for it. Another word might be fraudulent. The jury deliberated for 5 hours. When they came back, the verdict was clear. Cameron Price and his legal team had committed fraud. The lawsuit was dismissed, and a new judgment was entered against him for damages to Alina Rodriguez, $250,000 for lost income, emotional distress, and damage to reputation. But there was more. The judge had ordered the State Athletic Commission to review his credentials and his training practices. By the time Cameron left the courtroom, he'd already received a notice that his personal training certification was being revoked pending investigation. I watched him realize it, watched it sink in, watched him understand that he wasn't just losing the case. He was losing everything, his reputation, his credentials, his ability to work in the industry he'd built his identity around. Marcus had settled and slipped away, but Cameron had decided to fight, decided to lean into his confidence and his belief in his own superiority. That decision had destroyed him. I didn't celebrate that day. I remember Patricia wanting to take me to dinner to acknowledge the victory, but I declined. I went back to my apartment and I sat on my couch in the dark and I felt something shift. The anger was gone. The pain was gone. The need to prove myself to Marcus, to prove myself to Cameron, to prove myself to anyone, that was gone too. What remained was a strange, calm emptiness. 3 weeks later, Cameron's personal training license had been formally revoked by the state. A news story ran about how his fraudulent lawsuit against me had been dismissed, how his attempts to take over my business had failed. The story referenced his prior lawsuits, his pattern of behavior. By the time it was done, he wasn't just discredited, he was toxic. His gym canceled his contract. His sponsorships pulled. The supplements company that had been featuring him in ads distanced themselves publicly. Within 2 months, he'd moved out of Portland entirely. I heard he'd gone to Arizona, tried to restart, but his history had a way of following him. His YouTube channel, which had once had 200,000 followers, was flooded with comments from people I'd never contacted, people who'd researched him independently and shared what they'd found. By the end of the year, he'd stopped posting. Marcus's situation was more complicated because Marcus was a small enough problem to solve privately. He paid his settlement. He signed his documents. He disappeared from his position at Apex Capital, claiming to need a sabbatical for personal reasons. I heard, through Diane, that he'd checked himself into a treatment facility for gambling addiction. Whether that was true or just the story he was telling, I didn't know. I didn't care. What mattered was what happened to Elite Core. I used the settlement money to buy out Marcus completely. I refinanced the business loans. I hired 2 additional trainers, people I knew, people who shared my philosophy. I expanded to 2 locations, both of which I owned entirely, both of which were built on the same foundation, paying attention to the person, not the performance. My clients came back. The ones Cameron had intimidated returned to their training with me. The ones who'd questioned their own pain signals and their own instincts remembered that I'd been right all along. Bethany came back to morning classes. She told me that standing in that courtroom, testifying about how Cameron had treated her, had been the first time she'd actually believed that her experience was valid, that she hadn't been weak, that a person could know their own body better than an external expert. "Thank you," she said, "for fighting for that, for fighting for all of us, really." I didn't tell her that I'd been fighting for myself, that revenge and justice and vindication had been the same thing, that I'd needed to win not to prove something to them, but to prove something to myself, that I was strong enough to survive being underestimated. I'm standing outside the courthouse in the rain, and I'm not thinking about Cameron or Marcus anymore. My phone has buzzed with 47 notifications I haven't read. Clients congratulating me. Diane finally texting me back after I'd been distant for months. A local reporter asking for an interview. I silence my phone. I watch the rain fall on the pavement. I think about the girl I was before all of this, the girl who believed that good work spoke for itself. That truth would win. That love meant sharing control of the things you'd built. I'm not that girl anymore. I'm not sure what I am. Harder, maybe. Sharper. More aware of how easily people can be motivated by their own fear and their own hunger. More aware of how many lies can sound like truth if they're told with enough confidence. But I'm also still the person who noticed that Bethany had knee pain and wanted to figure out why. The person who saw the broken parts of people and believed they could be strong. The person who built something from nothing because I had to believe I was capable of it. That hasn't changed. What changed is that I've learned to protect it, to be strategic about my trust, to keep the part of myself that is vulnerable separate from the part of myself that is strong, and to recognize that they don't have to be in conflict. I pull my phone out and open a message to Sarah Chen, my investigator. "Thank you for everything. If you ever need something, let me know." She responds immediately. "You played that perfectly. Anytime you need something researched, you call me." It's kind of her to say, more than kind. But I've learned that loyalty isn't something I should expect. It's something I should recognize when it appears and hold on to lightly, knowing it can be withdrawn at any moment. That's not pessimism. That's realism. And realism is the only foundation strong enough to build on. The next morning, I'm at the gym at 5 a.m. The lights are on. The space is quiet. I can hear the hum of the HVAC system, the slight creak of the floor, the sound of my own breathing. I set up the morning workout. I think about the people who will come through those doors in 20 minutes. Bethany with her renewed confidence. Maya with her quiet strength. Tony with his careful form. All the ordinary people becoming more capable every single day, not because someone screamed at them or pushed them beyond their limits, but because someone believed in them. The first client walks in at 5:47 a.m. It's a new person, a woman about my age looking nervous. "First day," I ask. She nods. "What made you come in?" "I read about your lawsuit," she says, "about how you stood up to someone who tried to take you down, and I realized that if you could be strong like that, maybe I could be too." I feel something in my chest shift. It's not triumph. It's not vindication. It's just the simple recognition that what I went through, all of it, the pain and the betrayal and the humiliation and the rage, had actually meant something. Okay, I say. Let's get started. And just so you know, I'm going to be watching you closely, not to judge, but so I can understand who you are and what you're actually capable of. Sound good? She nods. And we begin. As she's stretching, warming up, preparing her body for the work ahead, I think about something Patricia told me in the final days of the trial. Revenge isn't a victory, she said. It's closure. The real victory is what you do after. She was right. The real victory is this: the quiet mourning, the ritual that's been restored, the knowledge that I built something genuine and someone tried to steal it and failed, that I survived, that I'm stronger. That no matter what someone else tries to do, no matter how they manipulate or lie or scheme or betray, the thing I built from my own two hands, my own mind, my own belief in myself, cannot actually be destroyed. It can be threatened. It can be attacked, but it cannot be taken. And I learned something else, something darker and more useful. Neither can I. The woman finishes her warm-up. I guide her to the first movement, a simple squat, just to see how her body moves, how she distributes her weight, where she's tight or collapsed or defended. Good, I tell her, and I mean it. Now, let's teach your body what it's actually capable of. She looks up at me, and I see hope in her face. Not the naive kind, the kind that believes everything will work out because you're a good person. The harder kind. The kind that knows you might have to fight, that knows people might try to break you, but also knows that you might be stronger than you thought. I smile at her, and I'm smiling at something deeper. At myself, maybe. At the woman I became in order to survive what was done to me. At the woman I'll continue to be, moving forward, never forgetting what I learned, never quite trusting in the way I did before, but also never again being someone who could be erased. The trial is over. The lawsuit is won. Cameron is gone. Marcus is history. But the real victory isn't in any of that. The real victory is that I'm still here, still building, still strong. And I can't be stopped.